The Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the effect of the President's fiscal year 2016 budget and legislative proposals for the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service's Energy and Minerals programs on private sector job creation, domestic energy and minerals production, and deficit reduction. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member and the vice chairman and a designee of the ranking member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. However, any time that the full committee chairman or ranking member are here, they will be recognized also. So I think we have that to look forward to today as well. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for my opening statement. Today's hearing will address the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management's 2016 budget proposals for energy and minerals management. We will be examining how these agencies' budgets will be used to promote energy development and how safe operations can be ensured without duplicative and overly burdensome regulations. The BLM seeks $1.35 billion for funding in fiscal year 2016, an increase of $140 million from what was previously enacted. That's about a 10% increase. This increase will be in part premised on the administration's claim of increased oil production on onshore federal lands. There has been an increase of federal onshore production of oil from 103 million barrels in 2008 to 148 million barrels in 2014. When tribal lands are included, that number jumps to over 200 million barrels produced. This increase is noteworthy and is a trend that should continue across all energy sectors. However, I'm afraid the good news ends there. For those same years that oil production has increased on non-tribal lands, coal production has fallen from 483 million tons to 402 million tons, while natural gas production has decreased by 500 billion cubic feet. Although the administration credits itself for the increase in oil production, such credit is misplaced. Indeed, of the currently active 46,000 leases, this administration has approved 10,000 at the most. In other words, nearly 80% of currently active leases were issued by prior administrations. 80%. According to information made available on the BLM's website, the BLM issued the lowest number of new leases in fiscal year 2014 than in any other year. In fact, the BLM has averaged 56% fewer leases issued per year than even the Clinton administration. Meanwhile, the total number of acreage leased has rapidly decreased. When this administration first took office, over 47 million acres of public lands were leased, the highest total since 1992. Since then, total acreage lease has fallen by a staggering 27%. Furthermore, the current BLM has been insistent on introducing new regulations and legislative proposals that are duplicative in nature, unnecessarily burdensome, and not based on the realities of onshore oil and gas or solid mineral production. The latest example of this is the new hydraulic fracturing rule that was finalized last Friday. Although the administration insists this new regulation will only, quote unquote, only cost $11,000 per well, it does not factor in the accompanying regulatory delays and those associated costs. In my state of Colorado, state regulators are doing an excellent job already, and they do not need another layer of one-size-fits-all regulation out of Washington. It would be a little less frustrating if the fracking rule had been the only attack on energy production that the BLM seeks to implement, yet it is not. And at a time when oil and natural gas prices are at consistent lows, the BLM seeks to potentially raise royalty rates and institute a new inspection fee. Your budget justification states, quote, energy and mineral resources generate the highest revenue values of any uses of the public lands, unquote. Yet the long delays, coupled with proposed higher royalty rates and increased inspection fees, will continue to discourage industry interest in federal lands. This is not the way for BLM to proceed, and it is driving away the revenues that help justify the existence of your agency. As for the U.S. Forest Service, it has proposed a $6.489 billion budget for 2016. This is a $942 million increase over 2015. And what's that, about 15%? However, the service does not seek to adequately spread around the requested wealth. For those two line items that support energy and mineral development, the service seeks an 8% decrease. This potential cut could cost the Treasury more than $42 million in 2016 and adversely affect energy and mineral production on Forest Service land. Together, both the BLM and the Forest Service manage approximately 1/5 of the total surface area of the United States and over 1/3 of the nation's onshore mineral estate. I hope our discussion today will ensure that your budget is used to promote increased revenues for the American people on those vast lands that Congress has entrusted to you. This creates jobs, gives us more national security and energy security. With that said, I thank Chief Tidwell and Director Cornsey for your time today and look forward to your testimony. At this point, I'll recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Cornsey and Chief Tidwell, for making the second trip to this room within 1 week with agencies that have such broad and complex missions as your own. There's plenty for all of us to be interested in, and we appreciate that both of you have taken the time to be here once again. One of the things I know that there's a particularly great interest, and it was pointed out also in the chairman's remarks, on the Bureau of Land Management's recently released rule on hydraulic fracturing. Now, after having heard much of the industry's complaints about this rule, and if I knew nothing else about the rule, I would think that this is an earth-shattering change in the way the BLM and industry does business, and that there was going to be a huge crackdown on fracking on public lands, which I personally would not think would be such a bad idea to begin with. But that's just not true. Let's deal with the reality. I've been studying this rule, and I believe the complaints are greatly overblown. And I have to wonder, what color is the sky in their world? Because in the real world, this rule is just a modest update to existing BLM regulations. And it really reflects how the industry already operates today. I challenge the industry to point to the requirements in the rule that they don't already do. Even for the closed tank requirements, most companies on federal lands already do this. Then there's the complaint that the rule steps all over the state's authority to regulate fracturing. Very interesting point, but it's just not true. Forget about the state's variance provision in the rule. Even without that, there is no conflict between state and federal regulations because federal regulations do not, and I emphasize, do not preempt state rules even on federal land. If a state rule is stronger, and many of them are, companies will follow the state rule. End of discussion. Right now, the states and the BLM both regulate well construction, surface disturbance, how to handle the produced water, and many other components of oil and gas drilling. Yet, somehow, companies and states are able to deal with that situation, and the sky does not fall. The new BLM rule is just an extension and an update of the existing 30-year-old rules. I know much of the industry and many of the states and many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would prefer that BLM just had no rules whatsoever regulating oil and gas activities. Leave it all to the states, they say. I repeat, that is not responsible. That's not what we're here to do today. We are here to weigh the public interest on America's public lands. We are not talking about private lands. We are talking about the public interest. All Americans have a right to understand and to appreciate what takes place on public lands and have a right to have their rights protected. This is not the interest of one industry, no matter how generous those industries may be to individual members in their kind. The BLM has been entrusted by the Congress to oversee and manage public lands differently than private or state lands. Private and state lands do not have to be managed for multiple purposes, multiple values, and future generations are not, we are not entrusting the BLM to look over our public lands for future generations. There's no statutory provision for states or private landowners, as BLM does, to protect the scientific, the scenic, the historic, the water resources, the ecological resources, the recreational or environmental values of the lands that we own as a people. There is no guarantees of public input through the National Environmental Policy Act for activities that occur on private or on state lands. So yes, the BLM does have a more complex job because BLM has those responsibilities and more. For BLM not to develop common sense rules to manage oil and gas development on public lands would be a gross dereliction of duty and a breach of trust with the American people. The furor over this new rule will ultimately die down, and the industry will eventually admit, if not by word, then by action, that the rule not only does not change anything, it's probably really good business practices. I just want to end by saying I hope that we never lose sight of the fact that public lands are not private lands. They are special, they are owned by all the American people, and they are deserving of a higher standard of care. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Okay, I thank the ranking member for his statement, and we will now hear from the ranking member of the full committee. Then we will take a recess because votes have been called. There's only one vote in the series, so we should be able to go back there and come back here in about 15 minutes. But we will be in recess for a short time, and we ask your patience while we do that, and then we'll conclude our hearing at that time.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to accommodate your courtesy, it's fine with me. If you want to take the break now, I can return then with the rest of the members.
Well,
one vote.
That's gracious of you to offer. There's 12 minutes left. Let's go ahead and take your statement.
30 minutes. No, just
and so that'll just keep us moving along a little.
Thank you very much,
faster.
sir. I appreciate it. Mr. Ranking Member, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the courtesy to comment. Let me associate myself with the ranking members in opening comments, particularly on the recent fracking rule by BLM. You know, I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle are paying attention right now because, quite frankly, this is a very special and unique moment. We agree on an energy issue. I agree with them that the fracking rule from the Bureau of Land Management is absolutely terrible. It's not terrible for the reasons they think. No. The real reason it's terrible is because this rule does absolutely nothing. I invite my colleagues to go through the rule and find anything in it that BLM doesn't already require, that the states don't already require, or that industry doesn't already do. BLM had an opportunity to make some real changes, to raise the bar, to provide some real protections for our public lands and for the people's right to know. Instead, they looked around at what was already happening and decided to write that into the rule. This would be like the Department of Transportation issuing a rule saying every car needed a steering wheel and a brake pedal, and having the auto industry scream, that's an overreach. And unfortunately, now that the BLM feels it has accomplished something, the chance to write strong rules that truly protect our water, our air, public health, and our lands is gone. Some complain that this steamrolls the states. Nothing could be further from the truth. This doesn't even nudge them. When the rule takes effect, drillers will go out, meet the highest standard that applies, just as they've always done. The highest standard that applies is often the state rule, and that will not change once this BLM regulation is implemented. Most drillers on BLM land will continue to follow state rules. This is not a disruption of the status quo. Quite frankly, it's an affirmation of the status quo. Relying on industry-initiated databases for public disclosure of chemicals used in fracking is nothing more than the fox guarding the henhouse. Companies will keep claiming these chemicals are trade secrets, proprietary, and the public will continue to be kept in the dark. I give the BLM the benefit of the doubt only because their hands are tied by Congress, which always seems to find another way to let the oil and gas industry avoid complying with environmental laws. The Halliburton loophole is just the worst example and the most indefensible. In what universe do we want companies injecting dangerous chemicals into the ground to be exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act? There is nothing more important to Americans than safe drinking and potable water. Why are we letting oil and gas drillers off the hook by having to follow the Safe Drinking Water Act or other bedrock environmental laws? My colleagues and I recently introduced a set of bills known as the Frack Pack, which closes these loopholes and actually makes fracking safer, instead of trying to whitewash it under the guise of so-called regulations. The safety of our drinking water needs more oversight than, not less. And with that, thank you for your courtesy, and I yield back.
Okay, I thank the ranking member, and we will now be in a short recess. Hopefully 15 or so minutes. We'll be back here since there's just one vote. We'll be in recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.